Welcome back. Welcome again to Mhandisi the Engineers podcast. This is Newton, Loiret Newton, the host. And today you're going to have a discussion on the Engineers Act 2011, that's the Engineers Rules of 2022, the scale of fees. And with me is one producer, Mr. Okello. The floor is yours.
Yes. Yeah, today, yes, Okelo, mimi nakwanga tu mtu wa behind the scenes, but today we have decided to try something different. Even the format is different. If anybody's listening to the only the audio, today tuko na video kwa YouTube. So you can at least see us if you've never seen us before. And we just want to have, just a discussion on the engineers' scale of fees or engineers' rules in general, which I think is kind of like an interesting topic, at least for anybody who wants to practice in the engineering field, especially for young professionals getting into the field. It's important to know about these rules. Yeah.
Well, it's important again to mention that it's not only rules that apply to professional engineers engineers that are getting into the field, even those that have been in the field. It's necessary that you are aware that these rules exist, you know what it says, and you can get these rules easily. You can go to the ABK website and get to see and even read through, as we shall have discussed and pointed out what we considered important. Again, could be subjective, depends on our interpretation, but this is our opinion. I just wanted to point that out so that somebody cannot take legal action against us. This is just an interpretation of young engineers. And
Yeah, disclaimer: it is not advice. It is not professional advice. It is just we are just talking, thinking through it. Because also, I think the one of the things we are also planning is this is just the beginning of the conversation. Hopefully, further along, we might even just invite other guests to speak more about it, to even get more clarification.
yes, and that sets the ground. So for these rules were actually gazetted the month of February, that is 2022, quite recent. And what we're also doing again is to get the word out there that we have rules that apply to professional engineering services. I think that it is important again as an engineer practicing in the various fields that you look into this and you are aware that the rules exist so that you can even use it to guide your day-to-day work. Um, so yes, what these engineering disciplines again that are recognized by the board? So we have a number of 11 disciplines recognized, and that is aerospace,
Anita, before I think
agriculture.
before we begin with going into the disciplines, I think we should probably talk about perhaps why does the document exist in the very first place? Why perhaps the DBK see it fit to design these rules? Like we can just start from there, just at least to give people the motivation as to why they should even care about the document.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. So there are several ways to look at it. One would be the objective of the rules, but again, remember that there was no framework with which engineers would have used to even cost their services. Of course, from where I sit, there's a question that has always been, and I've tried to really know how to do it, which is how do you value your work? And part of knowing how you value your work is what is the directives given in this document,
Yeah.
and what I find interesting is the way the document is even structured, and to the extent that you are directed that this is what you're supposed to do at this point, this is what you're supposed to do, this is how you're supposed to cost this. I think that is necessarily important, and we shall look into it. But when a producer, you can point out what I may not have seen.
Yeah, I think also part of one of the something additional to add for the for it is like, yeah, just also to give guidance for um how engineers should charge, as you've said, and also just to create a framework just for harmonious operating, so that also, I think one of the stipulations, like, they want to prevent undercutting by and among engineering services, because you want to at least have a certain level of quality, to say, like, if you're constructing something, this is like the minimum cost, so that if someone is trying to cut corners, you're like, no, that's illegal, these rules don't allow that. So creating that framework, it's it creates an environment within which the engineers can provide their services successfully. But also, if we have a framework, it's not just protecting the engineers alone, it's also protecting the people who will have to how do I put it, deal with this, with the infrastructure that the engineers have created. So it's both protecting the engineer and also protecting the general public, to ensure at least the socioeconomic development of the country is realized. So I think that's why at least the rules are important uh, in that in that aspect. That's something that was that's been included in the document. Yeah.
Yeah, and in so many words, what you would have said is, I mean, just paraphrasing what you said, one of the objective again of this rules is to ensure that we have quality services and that the clients get the value for money. There's no point actually if you're constructing a house and you end up cutting corners to the extent that your building collapses, endangering the lives of the person networking in the building, the neighbors, and other infrastructure users. We have seen that happen in this country. A few months ago, we had several houses collapsing in, like, we had one in Kiambu, we had one along some time in Gong Road, and one of the things that came out again, even as the board looked at the reasons as to why we had that challenge, is that the works that were done in that site were not done through the avenue that the law recommends, which is to procure professional services from professional engineers. Um, how does what is the point of having these professional services? And what are actually the professional services? I mean, if you look at the rules again, it's instructive in the sense that you are told what exactly these professional services are. And again, for an engineer, before you're able to charge the services, there's some level of let me call it thought process and deliverables that you're supposed to have, to the extent that get you to a point where the outputs are said to be professional. There is also some form of training again in this regard, because you might be in a position of being unaware of what, or rather, you are doing something because it has worked, but not necessarily in the correct way as directed here. This is actually what we'll call our Bible for the rules, and it should form the benchmark or the standards that all engineers actually should use. And for I think I had jumped the gun and went to actually point out what are the disciplines recognized, because it is necessary to know who are these persons within the engineering fraternity that these rules apply to.
Okay, so I think at least since we have now the general picture, you can now proceed at least to now let's start defining. Yeah, you can mention the fields.
So we are directed actually to that is, we are having 11 recognized fields. We have aerospace, agricultural, biomedical or medical. That is engineering. We have chemical, we have civil and structural, electrical, um, electronic and telecommunication. I mean, it's important again to mention here that electrical, that is, and then electronic and telecommunication are two separate recognized fields. I mean, we'll see that even as the deliverables are concerned as we
Though
go
you can
forward.
also argue electronic can be its own separate thing, and telecommunications can be its own separate thing. But let's leave it as the board has
Yeah,
decided to
I mean,
combine them.
in the wisdom of the board, that is what we have.
Mhm.
Of course, arguments can be, but yeah, we can look at it later. So we also have marine, we have mechanical, mechatronic, and then mining. Of course, there are certain fields here that I didn't know that the board recognized, or I was not actually aware. I'm here to meet an agricultural engineer, but I think that in future you might want to bring even that person to bring some perspective in how that applies to us as a country. Yeah, so we the scope of this source again, as we have defined, is it is directive that it is going to be applied to operation engineering services offered by an engineer or a firm. So if you are involved in the business of engineering, that is, you design, you do some construction, so long as it can be called professional, then these rules apply to you. We will see it even as we move forward.
Yeah. Although there was a question I think I had posed to you, because the rules as they're stipulated is for an individual engineer or a firm. And I think I'd asked you what happens to engineers who are working within a firm. How do they get to work? How do they get to? Is there a way that they can benefit from these rules? But yeah, we'll figure that out as we go along.
Yeah. Let me just get that going because I think it's a good question. Of course, yes, you can benefit as an engineer working in a firm for the reason that you'll have clarity of your deliverables. You'd actually know from what step you're required, what is needed of you, and what qualifies to be called as a professional engineering services. Now, where we draw the line, I think at this point, my interpretation is where the compensation comes in.
Hmm.
You might be doing professional work, yes, and in a way, you could be a source of cheap labor, but because you negotiated, let me call it contract, without this knowledge, then this can form the basis of new knowledge, and in your subsequent contract you can put to use the requirements or the directives you're being given here. Of course, there's a long way to go. It's not a quick win thing, but we shall discuss it as we go along. But I think it was important to just point that out. It's not prescriptive that you're being told, okay, go and tell your employer this. We're just telling you that the rules exist. You can go through it, read through it, and then now probably in our discussion you can get one or two. But again, at the end of the day, the discussion shall be between you and your employer, and you'll be able to get some, let me call it some form of guidance. I'm not pretty sure that is clear.
Yeah, I think that's good enough.
Yes,
Yeah.
but again, there's something here that I think is quite necessary to look at, and that is the record drawings or the as-built drawings. And what is mentioned here, I think this applies again to what I do on a day-to-day basis. Um, the record drawings are interpreted here, or we are being directed, are prepared by the contractor or the person who did the works for approval by the professional engineer. Um, Sometimes you may find in certain situations where um, the record drawing or what the contractor did is absent, and something that probably our contractors might need to improve on. Where you just say nothing changed much. It's not clear. It's not it's not very descriptive per se. But when you say it didn't change much, it would have been better if a sketch would have been made. And then now the professional engineer looks at it and then now approves or disapproves. And then the interpretation again here is the drawing should represent what was done.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if there's some form of guesswork that has to come in, then that comes out to be not the correct thing to do. But yes, I think that was what I also wanted to put out. Um, so
Think
we
maybe
can
just
move
something
on.
else before we move. Just something I wanted to mention is like maybe another document that may be of interest is there's um there's the Engineers Act of 2011, which I think it would be pretty important for someone to also look at because it has some of the definitions that that this particular engineer rules kind of pulls from. Like for instance, the definitions of, like, if you want to read more definitions of what a farm, a project, or an engineering system is, so it gives those definitions. And also, like, this document was also kind of like pulled, it was derived from one of the mandates. I think it was in section 7.1 of the Engineers Act, a mandate for the for EBK to create at least, it's one of the functions of EBK to kind of like create, to create these rules. I just put it that way. So someone may also want to, in their own time, just to also have that document in the back of their mind to also just look at it. Yeah. Going forward, I think maybe something, looking at this, the way I've seen it is like the way these rules are divided, are kind of like divided in terms. There's the standard professional engineering services, and then there's also a now additional engineering services. And each of these, there's a different way. There are different set of rules for each of those categories, and also there's a different set of way in which the of different ways of price of fees you can charge for the different sections. So I think we can start with the defining what the standard professional engineering services are and what the stages are.
Good. So I think there's a thin line between the additional professional engineering services and then now the standard professional services, because I think my reading of the document says at the point that you get to site and your your advice is being sought for a project that is not necessarily the project that you're working on, then that stands out to be additional services, or does not have an implication exactly on what you're doing at that point in time. Then that stands out to be additional services. But of course, yes, going forward, we might get more clarity on that. So for me, the standard professional services, we have it again given in several stages. That is, we have the inception stage, we have the preliminary design stage, we have again the detailed design stage, the tender stage, and then the contract administration stage, and lastly the closeout stage. So in the inception stage, again, it's instructive for us to have the definitions, or rather, what do we have in the inception stage. We are being told again that for projects where the nature and form of the function has been defined through previous, that is, engagements or investigations, there's a directive on what you're required to do there, and part of the key deliverables again in that stage include a technical and financial feasibility and related implications report. That is, you'd give a report on that. Then you'd have a report on consents and approvals, and again, generally the information on the project. So in this stage, we are seeing again that you can have projects of two forms. That is where everything is defined, and then now where nothing. Okay, let me say the project was not defined, so you need to do like some form of investigation as the engineer yourself. So part two of it, or rather, the other aspect of it, some of the deliverables include a signed agreement with the client, an agreement with the client on the scope of works and services, and a report on the project requirements. That is in the case where you already have defined, like, the project is known, like it's just quite clear what you're supposed to do. Probably, okay, we can jump in.
Yeah, because I think, yeah. So I think the way at least I understood it is maybe, yeah, because it's like one, the project has been done before you have experience and everything, so it's just a matter of format. So it's kind of like, yeah, let's say for instance, if you're building, what is required, what kind of permits are required, all the parameters are just known. So all you have to do is just get in and start doing the work. And maybe the other side is now, maybe if, let's say, I don't, let's say, you say maybe you're doing some kind of cutting edge design, or the client on something that is kind of unknown. That's where now you may need to now you as the engineer in the inception stage is kind of like different the way you're approaching it, because now in that particular point, if it's not properly, it's not been done before, you're not really sure about it. That's when now you need to start figuring out what is required. Is because I think there was something else that I found interesting. You have to, one of the things is you have to see, I don't know if it's here, but it's, you have to see if the project, it's the responsibility of you as the engineer to say, is this project actually financially, technically and financially feasible? Like if the client is coming, can we actually build this using the engineering principles? Will it be financially feasible for you as the client? So those are the different kinds of requirements. So of course, if it's well and done, that's relatively easy for you. But also, you approach the project from those two sides. This has been done before. We know the procedures. We know the permits we need, and this has not necessarily been done before, and we need to do some bit of investigation. So those are at least the two big uh, entry points of a project.
Yeah, and just to put again a scenario that we have probably seen in the previous days is you might get to a position where the client requires your input, kind of just asking you about a specific project, not necessarily contracting you, but the way you just like somebody needs your advice, and then how you give that this advice with the expectation that okay, sometime in future, probably this project can come through, and I'll be given this project. But this client decides to go through your back with your input, finds himself a fundi, and then now they say the engineer said this, the fundi interprets, and then now they start working. But you see, you have been bypassed in that case, and your services have been. We could actually argue in quotes that your services have been used, but you have not benefited yourself.
Yeah, you're not been
Um,
compensated.
yes, you've not been compensated. So we'll see again as we go along what the rule says about that, and at what point do you get into even request, or rather how do you come to know what compensation they're supposed to do. Now the next stage is the preliminary design stage. Of course, my interpretation here is these are just high level designs that would allow for decision making, and part of what we see here is the engineer is required to prepare and finalize the project scope. That is again taking input from the briefs and scale and functions of what you had in the preliminary stage. So some of your important, again to mention, key deliverables include a concept design. Just probably my understanding explains your approach of the problem and how you're going to take it through. And then now there's now the design of it. For example, let's say you are doing cable installation somewhere. You need again to explain how you arrived at probably your design inputs in what helped you to arrive at the design, or rather the cable sizes that you have. And then now there's the equivalent of the layout that you're going to have in that case, which can form and be part of the preliminary design. And then now what follows again from that is that you have to cost this. Again, you need to have your cost estimates, and then now reports on the investigations or surveys. For example, you went, I mean, you saw this cable is going to take a longer route. I'm going to have challenges on voltage drop. You revise the design again from your survey, and then say this is what is going to happen. But generally, the gist of it is that this is a high level design that is going to allow for decision making.
Yeah, I think for that, yeah, I think that you've covered it. I don't think I want to add anything on that. I don't know. Did we? Because the part you're saying, I think there was something. Did we mention that in the inception stage is where I think you are signing an agreement with the client?
No, I mean that is yes. I mean I mentioned that in the
Okay.
inception stage you have two approaches. That is one where the project scope, or rather
No,
the
no,
details
it's
of the
okay. If you
project are
if you
already.
mention it's okay. I just wanted to at least I think I wanted to figure at least if you're signing there, at least that's where at least maybe the engineer gets their protection. So we can go to the detailed design stage now.
No, I mean, there's something that again is worth pointing out because on the agreement is only on the second bit of the inception stage, where everything is already known. You understand, like the project scope, the project definitions are already design. I mean, um, the investigations of the project are already available, and you just have to come and pick that as inputs, and then now let's say the client has gotten to a point where they've made a decision they're going to move forward with the project. But in the first instance, we are not given directions on whether to have a signed agreement or otherwise, where the scope of the project and the details of the project are not known. So you have to start from first principles. So in that case, we are not directed whether you are going to have a signed document. But I think the question that you're putting out has to do something with compensation, and we will see that when we get to um, the compensation stage.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Okay.
not stage per se. Stage is not the correct word. Like compensation details when you're being directed on how to seek compensation. Yeah, so again, from the preliminary stage, you'll have to move into the detailed design stage, assuming, for example, that the project has been allowed to proceed. Um, and now in this stage, the engineer now is supposed to develop now the approved, because now your concept has to be approved, probably by let's say the client, or the details of what you expect to have in the project have been seen, and let's say the client has their consultant, and their consultant has said, okay, this is sound, this is a good engineering practice, we can proceed. So you have to now develop what we call something that can be constructed, and now you're supposed to move now to develop the approved concept to finalize the design. Of course, outline the specifications, cost your plan, etc., etc., and again, what are deliverables that you are expected to have here? You need to have your detailed design drawings. Um, uh, in the case of final drawings, again, they need to be signed by the design engineer, the two engineers actually, the design engineer and the professional engineer. Because remember, there's that bit where your drawings are being looked like you're the one who has designed them, but now there's that review, professional review by another party that is an engineer again, probably more experienced than yourself, so that we ensure that there are no um, there are no professional, I mean, not professional, but something that probably had forgotten. So again, the another output will be clear and complete contract drawings. If you are dealing with the bill of materials, like bill of quantities or bill of materials, we need to have that. Again, project specifications. My thinking of this is anything to do with what I'll call, if you are guiding a supplier or you are guiding, you need to procure some items. You need to say exactly what equipment you need. If it's a transformer, what is the rating of the transformer? What are the service conditions? So that the manufacturer is able to supply you the exact thing that you have or you want to put in your project. So you also have local authorities and regulatory authorities submission drawings and reports. Again, the government has to check and see that you are within the laws. What we call the regulator, and then the detailed estimates of your project costs. I mean, that is it, as far as the detailed design is concerned. And I think this is quite instructive because at some point, you might find that not everything, or um, not the whole process is followed. You can get a contractor who just gets the project. We just do things on the go. That might not be the correct way to do. We are being given directions here, and we should follow the commandments that are being set here by the board. Anything that you may want to put across, Kwanokel?
Maybe the part where I want clarification is like, because I mean, you are talking about the design engineer and professional engineer, where we are saying the professional engineer is checking the work of the design engineer. And I was assuming that's kind of like some kind of authority. What's the difference between now the local authority checking the work and now this professional engineer? Because I was assuming,
Uh,
yeah.
well, that's a good ask. I've not actually thought about that before. But my thinking is, you see, the professional engineer looks at it from the point of um, the soundness of the design. You see, for example, you might have said, let's say you uh, doing some cable connections, and for example, the cable connections that you are saying you have missed, let's say a significant item. Let's say you require some cable lugs and you have not had that in your design, and because of the project pressure, some items have been missed, or some items are not clear. You might think in your head that this drawing is significantly clear, but when somebody else looks at it, it can be interpreted another way.
So the question,
So those
okay,
are the
maybe
uh-huh.
where is the professional engineer coming from? Like, okay, are we talking when okay, let's just when you're looking at the that where the design and are they coming from the same farm or something like that? Like, is that like for me? I am like say I am the engineer, I'm the farm. So when you're talking about this designer and professional engineer, is it now at my farm level before any involving other authorities, or is now at the is it like I have design and then a professional engineer separate from my organization has to look at my drawings?
Uh-huh. So there are two ways to look at it. One would be if you have a professional engineer within your firm, because again, we do not have like sufficient professional engineers in the country. They,
Okay.
they cannot look at all the documents. So you might find sometimes in certain firms, we people are yes experienced, but the law requires that a professional engineer should look at them. You understand?
All right. Yeah.
So the local authority now would check in and see that you have met the requirements of the regulator.
Okay. So I
You
think I
understand?
understand now. So it's basically like if you're a farmer, if let's say you're a farmer and you already have a professional engineer, you can just do it in house.
Yes.
But if you've done the design but you don't have someone who's registered as a professional engineer, now it is up to you now to maybe outsource, maybe or subcontract a professional engineer for that, just for that part of approving the document,
Yeah, reviewing the designs actually,
just
confirming
reviewing
that
the
things were
design.
done correctly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Now that makes sense. Now at least I am able to differentiate between, or at least to clearly separate between the what the professional engineer does and what the local authorities do.
Okay, so once the detailed design stage is done and the project is in a good position, of course you get now to tender procure the items. Um, so this is now where we know the government guys are happy. So the guys are just sitting in the office. They have done um, the they receive this documentation. Let's say this is a government project. Of course, the first step would have been sending out the bids, procurement guys. So request for quotations, or yeah, RFQ, and then now you get the quotations. You check with the quotations. You look at actually the documentation that the service providers have provided. You see now here that there are two parties involved. That is the tender guy, the tender engineer, and then now there's the procuring entity, like let me say the service provider, who now tenders for the project. One of the services again that's supposed to be offered here by the professional engineer is to review the designs, drawings, and schedules in accordance. You see now there's a budget, so it is the work of the tender engineer in this case. I mean, not tender engineer, but the guy working in, I mean, giving services as part of the tendering stage, to review and to ensure that we're within the budget. And again, some of the very significant deliverables in this stage include specifications and stamped working drawings. Where now you have agreed with the selected contractor, they have understood the drawings, they are okay with the drawings, so we move on. So stamped drawings. Tender documentation including priced tenders. We also have evaluation reports, which will now say, okay, person, company X or engineer X has met the requirements of what we wanted in this project, and therefore we are selecting him because probably he's the lowest bidder or meets the criteria that we had set and meets all of them. Because now those people that has did not meet this requirement, you also have to tell them why they did not meet this requirement. I'm not sure if that is entirely the process, but again, it's good practice. Similarly, the way you apply for a job and you are told, okay, we selected, you are unable to qualify, probably your pricing was not correct or you are too high on costs, so that this person can improve next time. The other item again that we have here is priced contract documentation. So that now you have agreed as a contractor, I'm going to do this work for 200,000. You don't come again now in future and say no, that was not the case, without substantiating and saying that we need to have this contract be 2 million. Um, I don't know if that made sense.
So is it like, so that means is in the tender stage, is that when now you finalize all the payments or whatever? Okay, is it like you finalize the contract between you and the client? Because I
Let me
remember
just say,
in the preliminary, I remember in the preliminary stage was just no, in the inception stage for when the design is known, or the whatever the project specifications are known, there was just a signed agreement with the client. But then now I'm seeing the tender stage, at least one of the is a price contract documentation. So yeah, so is this contract now the where now you're saying this is how, yeah, a signed contract with the how compensation is going to work? Yeah, you were going to say.
um, I think to me what is also what should be clear again here is that you can have separate firms doing this. There's somebody who has a niche in doing surveys, for example, and they have they do not want to proceed to administer or work with the project. So their input in that stage, they sign that agreement, they provide the input of the project, and then go again to like do other works, or they are not involved again in that project. So in that case, that contract that was signed before was for the services that were offered in the inception stage. So now we move from the inception stage, we go to the preliminary design stage. Of course, the inception stage and the preliminary stage can be done by, let's say, one firm, or separate firms. But again, the deliverables and the services offered in the preliminary stage only apply in the preliminary stage. But the project is moving forward. So you get to a point where the project is supposed to be, actualized, and this priced contracts. Let me, in our local term, we'll actually call it watu wa kufanya kazi, like the contractor. You see now the contractor might not have been involved in the inception stage, in the preliminary design stage, and even in the detailed design stage. Yeah, and I put that to like, okay, where's the drawing? I am supposed to place this pole here and here. Where's the design? You get. So it is for the works of the construction that we have this priced contract documentation. Is that have I made sense, or still we are still in the dark?
But okay, looking at the document, there's always the term where, okay, it's kind of like you always have a lead engineer for the project who's supposed to go through each and every single one of these, the whole of this. So it depends. It is now the lead who would probably, if he needs someone, because I don't think I would think the client would be like, I need an engineer to work on this. This is my project. Then they take to an engineer, and whatever needs to be done, uh, whatever services that need to be done. So it is the lead engineer who decides, I need to bring this person in at this particular stage, and I need to bring this other person in at this particular stage. So those are kind of like now the responsibility of the lead engineer, whoever other engineers will bring. So that's why I'm trying to, because if you sign a contract with the client, however you're going to divide this work, it's now the burden is on you as the lead engineer rather than on the client. So whatever you've agreed in the contract with the client, you should have already factored in all those different kinds of things.
Oh, yeah, I actually see where you come from. Um, let's say, Farm X has been contracted to do all these works. Get
Mm-hmm.
like the client does not know all these things. The client does not know anything to do with the inception stage, does not know anything to do with even the tender stage. All the client requires is, okay, what are the numbers? Where are we? So let's say there's that person that handles that side from the client, and let's assign the name to this person as the lead engineer. But you see, again, it is the lead engineer cannot perform all these works. So there's somebody that's going to do this contracting, this doing of the works on the ground, mtu wa mkono sasa. You understand? So it is this mtu wa mkono that, of course, I'm giving a simplified explanation, but it's this mtu wa mkono that is now going to get us, or rather has, would form an, would be a function again of this priced contract. Let's say you are constructing a road. Umeona, unajenga Thika super highway. Of course, there could be the company that is administering that contract, is working through to develop or rather work that road. But again, there are small things that are being done there. For example, um, the drainage could be done by the design could be done by somebody else. But again, a small company can be subcontracted to do that. The polling, I mean, the supply of, for example, the supply and erection of, let's say, the street lights could be done by a separate company. So you see now this supply and delivery can form part of the priced contract. I'm not.
Yeah. So
Is it
that's what
clear?
I'm saying. So what I'm saying, like I'm saying, at the price contract, that's when you're saying between you and the client. So the lead engineer, as the lead engineer, you should have factored. You should already know these are the people that I'm going to need. These are the subcontractors I'm going to need. If I need other engineers, these are all the people I'm going to need. Then you present to your to your client and say this is the pricing, factoring all those things. So basically, I was just saying like the price contract is like where you say like this is what the project is going to cost, having me as a lead engineer having factored in everything. So if I'm going to have contractor for preliminary, that's already been factored in. So that's what just trying. I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I mean, that is correct, because
Yeah.
before even you are allowed to be the lead engineer of the project, or your firm is accepted as to work on the works, you have factored in all your costs.
Hmm.
And part of defining the scope again is for you to really understand where you come in the project, what your value within the project is going to be, and what you're going to outsource. Um, Important again to mention here that the client might not be aware of these small works that you are giving to specialized firms. If you are the lead engineer, the client just wants to know that, okay, mambo yangu iko, um, we are progressing well and we shall meet the target deadline. If we say we are constructing this thing and it's going to take us 1 year, it is you now to manage this 1 year to the extent that by the time 1 year is over, my project is complete.
Okay.
So
So.
yes, ukianza mwanzo, those are the things that you consider. Again, the engineer has to be that significantly experienced to know that all these things are required. Sikuwe kama hizi, the ones that we are also seeing again out here, where um, somebody, because they have the financial muscle, procures the services of an engineer ad hoc.
Mm.
Ile tu when you register a company, like we have seen some of our politicians do, to register a company, you are part of the tendering committee. You come here, ask, okay, Anthony, I want to construct a school. How much? Let's say 700,000. So you get your pricing of the 700,000, and you ensure that everyone that bids, you have beaten them, but you have no engineering background. So you work behind the doors. Again, you're the one who's going to pay this project. So you come in, get a fundi, get somewhere, get somebody who does drawings for you, like not necessarily following the right procedure or following the right procedure, but not as directed according to the rules that we are having here. So yes, yeah. Moving on again, we get to, once you have done the tendering, so we are doing the works now. Tunajenga barabara. We are having the contract administration stage. And there, there are several works here. I mean, this would require an engineer to, be around or attending site visits and technical progress meetings. Um, Again, inspecting the works for conformity with the contract, and your key deliverables here would include construction documentation and schedules of predicted cash flow. I'm not pretty sure where that. I'm not involved in a project that does that, but anyway. Um, Again, contract instructions, estimates of proposed variations and variations for payment certificates, if any. Again, progress reports, etc., etc. So there are a lot here, by the way. Probably from a design point of view, I might not be able to see all of them, but you can jump in here. Okay.
No, I think this is where now the rubber meets the road. Whereby, yeah, I think for at least for most of the rules, it's just like just making sure that the work is actually happening. So like well, okay, so this one I think one of the things we were talking about is we were saying we were just having just a light discussion. We were saying some of these rules are mostly meant for the built environment kind of stuff, because they always there's quite a bit of talking about making site visits and everything. And one of the things I always think about is when you're doing something with electronics, and where is the site visit? You're just busy designing your stuff. But yeah, but basically it's just the contract administration. I think is just giving just the details about all the rules about how you should deal with the inspecting the site, making sure everything's going well as it is, making sure you have the certificates and everything. So it's just the work being done. But it's kind of interesting uh, that they've given quite a more emphasis on like the design stage is divided into so many the artist is divided into preliminary design stage and detailed design stage. I don't know, I would have felt like maybe because now I feel as if the most critical part is when you're actually constructing something, because I don't know whether it's okay. I don't know what you think. Should there be at least maybe a bit of segmentation on how they're talking about the site, or giving rules on the actual construction, or is it just okay for it to be lumped up into one big thing?
I think it's a project by project case. Huh? If you're constructing a house, you might not necessarily have the same contract administration cutouts as someone who is constructing, let's say, a dam, or someone who is working, as you have said, in an electronics project. I think the way I look at it is for the reason that the outputs of the design stages have been identified. What you only do with the construction stage is you take the design and then now you follow. Okay, we have said that you need to get us. We need to lay this cable from um, point A to point B. How is it said in the design? Yes, timber, worker, 1.5 meters underground. When you go to the contract administration stage now is the only thing you need to check as an engineer is have we met the 1.5 depth that the design says? Yes or no? What is the width? Because that is now the width of the trench. What is the width of the trench? We are saying, let's say, even 30, 3,000 millimeters, for example. Have we met that? Yes, we have met that. Then lay the cable. I think that to me, it's not necessarily important, or rather, the board in its wisdom was actually correct to lump it up. Because if, again, you would go into details of all the projects, you constrain yourself. It is now up to the engineer again, based on the training that they have had, to look at the stages and interpret them as is. For me, I think it's quite fine. Not really necessarily something that should have been considered by the board, but again, you're given leeway here. You know, you cannot be micromanaged. like everything kabisa. I mean, you have been trained, man. You used your think from first principles, execute. I think for me, we are fine with that.
Okay, so let's now finish up the standard professional service with the closeout stage.
But even on the closeout stage, there's no again directive here on the key deliverables, but of course there are certain services mentioned, like for example, preparation of project final accounts, acquisition of as-built drawings and documentation. Remember again, pale as-built or record drawings, we had said that it is the contractor who is to do that. So that now it is approved by the professional engineer. Now, when you are closing out this stage, you collect all this documentation. So now when we say, okay, we did the project, we are done, this are the documentation. If you go through it again, you can see what was done. I think close it's quite straightforward. I mean, somebody can just read through and be able to understand what's going on.
Okay. So far we've looked at three or two sections of the scale of rules: the preliminary and the standard professional engineering services. But as I was saying before, there's also the provision for additional professional engineering services. And for the additional professional engineering services, they're kind of, you can say, largely segmented into additional professional engineering services of a general nature, and then there's also the additional professional engineering services of a specialist nature. Maybe the question would be like, what is considered to be what is additional professional engineering? What is an additional professional engineering service? And this is something that the services can generally be provided by an engineer or firm if it is either requested by the client or consented to by the client. So, because I'm thinking, looking at these two options is that either the client can say, "I want something to be done," or you can be, "I am the engineer. I have seen something that was not within scope, and I want to involve." So, you as a client, are you willing to to agree to this and pay for these extra services? So, something that can be considered an additional professional services is, for instance, if your client comes and makes inquiries which are not directly concerned with with those current works and its subsequent utilization. So I don't know. For this, I'm just kind of thinking like the client has just something that's not necessarily within the scope of what you had agreed. Maybe they want to the thing about expansion. I don't know. Let's just say the thing about expanding or something, but it was not defined. It is not necessarily designed to the work. You're not being billed. You're not. You did not get into a contract with that. You can say, okay, fine. Those are additional services that you're offering. I think there was another part was that I found kind of interesting was whereby in let me just find it. Or Newton, if you can jump in, if you have some, have you really thought about what you want to say?
Um, yeah, I think for me, a few of the items that stood out actually are the services pointed out. Um, for example, of general nature. If, for example, you get to a position where you're supposed to negotiate a contract with, say, a subcontractor, and that this subcontractor, okay, you are supposed to negotiate a contract or a subcontract with a contractor, and this contractor needs to be selected other than by competitive tendering. You see now in the tendering stage, probably you people worked and you're able to identify a contractor. At some point, the one that was identified got to was unable to deliver as expected. Now you need to renegotiate with another contractor other than and not going through the competitive bidding process. So that qualifies according to the services identified here as an additional service. Another example would be, let's say the client wants you to provide project management services or construction management services, and that was not part of the scope. That qualifies again as additional services. The one that I like to highlight so much is the one on the inquiries, the for services or rather for items. let's say that like equipment that are not directly concerned with the works that you're working on at that point in time, and also its subsequent utilization. If, for example, you, Anthony, is the client, and then now you come and tell me, okay, I have a friend of mine who is also um, wanting to, like, say we worked on you on a project of, say, installation works, electrical installation works, and then now that friend of yours also wants is also considering building, and then now also wants to procure the services of electrical installation services. And the advice that I might give in that sense, so long as it does not is not being used in where I'm working, then that qualifies again to be additional services. Now,
I think before
when
I
we
think
go,
there was
uh
maybe there's a part which I was kind of a bit unclear about, because there's a part where they were saying that part of the additional services is whereby if you have to carry out works that have been abandoned by a contractor, or if the contractor fails to properly perform a contract, or upon delay in the client, okay, if the client fails to fulfill his obligations, that's kind of okay. But I'm also saying about if a contractor fails to do their work. So in this particular case, are we assuming the contractor was provided by the client, or how are you looking at that?
of course, if if I was involved, let's say in the tendering stage, and then in that process we're able to get a contractor who agreed or rather met the requirements of the works that we are supposed to have, that stage is already closed out. We had agreed, we had spent time on it. But now when I go again, when this contractor disappoints, understand, and then now we get to a position where we need to get another contractor for the project to proceed, then the process of getting this contractor is what we are being pointed out here as additional professional engineering services. As to whether the client provided or not depends again in you see, now if I picked this project as a company, for example, then it is within in-house that process takes. You can uh, again, this is not prescriptive. You can choose to charge or not charge, but on the client side, if the client's the one who brought the contractor, and the client was the one who the delays come from the client side. So you, because now your services are being sought to help the client get another subcontractor that is able to deliver, then you cost that charges, you cost that service. Clear? That does not make
It's
sense.
still a bit unclear. So would you assume, like, because now if you're the one who came with the contractor and you're dealing with that, so does that mean you're the one who has to absorb that kind of uh if the contractor fails, it's now your responsibility to, just because maybe you're the one who didn't do the work well, or in choosing you didn't do your diligence in choosing a reliable contractor.
Uh, well, I cannot speak effectively to that because I might not have the privilege of experience. But my understanding is in such a situation, sometimes the contractor can, you would have worked with the contractor before, you have done very good projects before, but certain issues come up on the contractor side that you may not have been, like, outside your control, that has made the contractor be in a position not to deliver. Then in that case, we can't really say that it is you that did a poor job. Again, with the items, or rather the specifications that you give for the contractor to meet, if all the boxes are checked, then we can assume that in that regard, the contractor has met the threshold that you require them to have met. But if I brought the contractor, of course, probably when we get to the cost, we can see where variation of costs arrive in, or rather how they get into the project. But you can choose to absorb the cost. I mean, this is solely on the part of the firm or the engineer, and decide to not cost the service. But again, if in a situation where it is the client that has brought the contractor, then you are offering an additional service to help the client select the contract.
Okay, I think maybe that's a point where I may need maybe to seek further clarity, because I think it would be very important to be at least very clear about how that actually works. Whether just because I think it's just, for me, it's one of those gray areas. So maybe in future we may find someone who actually has more preview to this to actually explain how this rule particular, because I think there are two rules which are kind of related, because there's also another one which is talking about carrying, if you have to carry out works and services arising from the failure of a client, contractor, or any other relevant person. I mean, when it comes to the client, if the client is the one who has failed to do something, you ask them to do something that's within reason for you to charge them and say, I asked you to do this, but you didn't do it in good time or whatever, and you're kind of like getting or interfering with my scope of work. That's kind of reasonable. But when now it comes to the contractor, I think maybe it would be prevalent to know if it needs to be regarded, knowing who is the one who is responsible for the contractor, whether the contractor is being provided by the client or it's being provided by the engineer. But because for me personally, I feel as if I am the client and then I give you Newton, you're my lead engineer, and I'm like, you figure out all that you need to do, and then you come and tell me, oh, this contractor failed, now we need to charge you more money. I'd feel a bit like I would feel a bit unfair in that kind of respect. So maybe it's just something that maybe we may need to just get more clarity on that point, because right now it's just
Yeah,
kind of subject to interpretation. It's not very clear, at least for me.
yeah, and I also want to also add in another variation to that, because sometimes you can have a client who keeps on shifting goalposts. They keep on adding like small scopes, and we move a little bit. Oh, now we have decided that we will construct a small house there. So would you help us with your people to like take this let me say cable to that place. So you are now having more casuals who are going to dig up the ground or drop that cable, and that was not initially part of what you were supposed to deliver. Or the client keeps on adding additional, let me just call it additional scope to the work that you're supposed to do. And because now you want to be good and have retained the client, you just decide to do that. Okay, I mean, it's a small work. Let me just have my people do it. Um, Again, something to consider might
Yeah, I think
get us.
for that one, I think it's you're protected by the rules, because if you have to do any works resulting from, if they're changing the scope, the moment the scope changes, that is additional work. If they want to make alterations, that is additional work. Now you can charge for those ones. So those flaky people, yes, I think they probably the engineers who designed it will encounter them. So yeah, those ones you can just say, oh, you want to change this, now you're changing the scope, now I'm going to have to charge you some more, because this is not what we agreed on. Because at least that because remember, you have that contract, so you're changing that scope. Now you actually within reason to charge them for that. That's an additional service.
Okay, probably in the future we shall get a guest that will be able to give us significant project examples on that. So the other one that I wanted to point out again on additional professional services was what was giving an example before of, that is for specialist nature. Now you might be very good with electronics, and we just want you to come and troubleshoot our circuit. That skill of yours of troubleshooting would be considered again as additional professional engineering services if you are not, if you're involved in a separate project, or you come in just to help sort out that. So we're also seeing that you're being told here, if you're obtaining specialist technical advice, whether say your transformer is behaving in an abnormal manner, and you can even receive that advice uh, via not necessarily in writing, but even just talking to you and saying, okay, now that could, what the problem that could be with that is, look at this tab and this tab, look at the ratio that you're having, or go and look at Fusex or something like that. That is, I mean, according to the board, considered to be additional professional engineering services. Um, Again, carrying out commissioning procedures. Very important. You just come in, commissioning, additional professional engineering services. Yeah, so I think for me, we are pretty covered on this item of additional professional engineering services. Unless, of course, you have something else to point out.
That's talking about that's basically talking about the general and the specialist additional provisional services.
Yeah.
Or are you talking about, because there are also other, when you're talking about, okay, fine. So you've done that because this was the other aspect. I think when I was asking you about uh the kind of like how you're pricing the scope. How you're pricing the project, the contract, whether and dealing with the whether you're having the lead engineer or subdividing it.
Yeah. I think we will tackle that effectively once we get to the section on uh, costing of the project, or rather cost of work.
No, see,
And
that's part of like, that's kind of like dealt with. It's here. It's in the additional. It's like part of the additional services, if I'm not wrong. Yeah,
probably I didn't get the question.
because here is just basically talking about now if a client appoints more than one engineer or firm, and appoints one engineer to be the lead over others, the lead engineer can provide certain certain services, such as being responsible for the overall administration of all the sections. So like having that kind of being the lead engineer now, rather than it being part of the this is now like, I'm assuming here is the client himself is saying, I have different sections that I want to deal with. I guess when you're talking about a building, they're different. You have, of course, you have different kinds of engineers you're involving, and then it's the client who is now selecting these different people. It's not like you as the firm saying we're the ones going to deal with it. So now, if you are appointed as the lead engineer, you can now kind of now charge the client in the sense that to do that administrative work, uh, and also to do that administrative work, to do the processing of any certificates or recommendations of payment. Because now, like, he's adding you more. It's kind of like adding the administrative work to your engineering work. So maybe that's just something I just wanted to kind of like add to the as part of additional services. Especially if you're in this is like just specific case whereby there are multiple engineers or multiple engineering firms, and it is the client themselves who has hired these multiple engineering firms, and he has chosen to appoint one of them as the lead engineer. So you as a lead engineer, you can charge for these services.
yeah, of course, we shall see that again when we get to the. I think there's a section that speaks to selection of the lead engineer and their deliverables for the lead engineer, and there's directions on how the lead engineer is supposed to work. Um, I think the basic interpretation of that would be, you see, now it looks like from the argument you're giving that it is the lead engineer who is taking instructions from the client. It is, I think my understanding is it's supposed to be the lead engineer who is advising the client. And once the client has already made a decision that Mr. Okero is going to be my lead engineer, then the technical directions are supposed to be emanating from Mr. Okello. so that now the client only receives briefs. Okay, we have reached here. Client pay. We have reached here. Client, we have a variation here. This is what you are supposed to do. But if it comes from the point of view of the client purchase goes, okay, brings civil engineer, client again brings electrical engineer, client brings structural engineer separate, and then now it is the client that's doing the coordination. That is recipe for chaos.
No, I think
um,
yeah, it's just the client who's okay. The client has let's say contracted these different engineering firms, but he appoints one of them to be the lead engineer.
yes, yes,
Yeah. So
correct.
so the, yeah.
And I'm saying
So
that
mhm.
in this bit of the responsibility of the lead engineer, I think under the section, one of the sections, we are being told what the responsibility of the lead engineer is and what is expected of the lead engineer. Now, from there, we can deduce that once services are offered or services are sought that are outside the agreement of the lead engineer, then that qualifies to be additional professional engineering service. But for the reason that you have already identified, or rather you have been given directions that Mr. Okello, you will be the lead engineer, then in that regard, your scope is already cut out. And the services that I think you're trying to point out would be captured in that directive. Should it be then that your services that are being sought outside the scope of the lead engineer that you had been given, because you cannot be a lead engineer without responsibility. That doesn't to me doesn't make sense. So part of what you're saying is what I am saying in the responsibilities that we are being directed, I think, in one of the schedules.
No, see,
And
okay. All I'm saying is like
mhm,
there's that standard. There's the standard services where we're talking about the different preliminary design, blah blah blah, all those stages.
yes.
But now I'm saying like if you are appointed as a lead engineer, you will
Uh-huh.
not be using you will not if that's not considered as standard service. That's considered as additional engineering service. So whoever is appointed as the lead engineer, if you're going to be responsible, that's not a standard service. That's an additional. You're providing an additional that falls under the category of additional engineering service. So yes, you're given the responsibility, but it's not a standard service. It's an additional service. So whatever rate you're going to charge it under additional, as an additional service you're rendering to the client, because essentially like what it makes sense because you're brought in. Let's say you're brought in. You have been brought in. The client brought you in as an electrical engineer, and that was like say the main mandate of how they contracted you. But they were like, oh, we also have these other people. Can you work with these other people? Can you now be the lead of these other people? So like your standard service was to do primarily electrical work, but now you have to coordinate these other people. It's kind of like now more because that now becomes less engineering work and more kind of like almost management work. So you as an engineer, how you're not going to charge the client under standard. It's going to be you're charging them using the guidelines in the additional services.
Okay, okay. Which also means that if I'm procured directly to be the lead engineer without the caveat that I am coming in as part of the electrical team or the electrical engineering team, then in that regard, would I still qualify as part of the additional engineering services?
At that point, I would say no. Like if you're like if they just come and say the client just comes and says, I want this done and I want you to do everything, you and only you, and you're the only one who's been contracted, and you're the project lead for everything from the get-go, then that means that one it will not be it will not fall under this. It's just only when so if you're like the fireman, you need these different kinds of engineers. It is up to you to obtain these engineers. It is within your control. You choose who you want. But now in this case is whereby the client amesema, this is who I want to do the civil engineering, this is who I want to do the electrical engineering, this is who I want to do the mechanical works, but I would like you to to supervise or to coordinate them. So that's now the difference. So you get the difference.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I understand. I
Yeah,
understand. I mean, it's pretty clear.
yeah.
But yeah, I've also remembered something again. part of what we are also being directed on on-site supervision works as part of additional professional engineering services. I just wanted to point out that the rules are actually very clear here, and it says that it is the control and responsibility for the supervision of works shall fall squarely on the engineer, professional engineer, or the firm that has been procured for the professional engineering services, and that all directions would be taken from the engineer. It's important to point out that responsibility because it is the engineer now that will be questioned when things do not go right. It's the engineer that ensures that things are done according to the engineering principles and according to the directions that we also been given. And if, in the opinion, again, very important, if in the opinion of the engineer, the nature of works requires full-time on supervision, then the engineer is directed again to advise the client of that fact and then go further and advise the qualifications of the person that's supposed to do that work. That is additional service because the client might not be aware that this is a complex project. This is a complex scope. I need somebody who can do and deliver the job. Um, and as professionally as possible. So it is the engineer. The most important thing here is that in the opinion of the engineer, sometimes we might not be empowered to give opinions sufficiently. But if, for example, Mr. Okello is thinks that enye hii kazi hakuna mtu mwingine anaweza fanya. Hii kazi lazima ifanywe na professional. It's important again to mention that in that instance, it is necessary that the engineer, I mean, that point comes out quite clearly. Yes, and with that, I think from my end, I've captured all that I wanted to point out in this
So I
case.
think, I think today, we have covered quite a bit. We've given the motivation for why the engineer rule scale of fees exists. We've talked about what the standard professional engineering services are. I think it's inception, preliminary design, detailed design. Next is what? Tender?
Tender, tender
The
stage,
tender stage, then the construction. No, it's the contract administration, and
and
then
then
the
close
closeout.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's just basically the profession. And then now we've just finished off with they are just describing what the additional professional engineering services are. And I think we want to finish this episode at that, but that means there's going to be a part two, which is also pretty interesting, which now we get to talk about money, how the scale of fees actually works. Because now there's this, as we've talked about the standard professional service, there's a scale of fees for how you should charge for the standard professional services. And then there's a scale of fees for additional professional engineering services. And then there's also a section for other payments for professional engineering services and miscellaneous provisions. So at least that part will start now. Will advise you maybe going forward, how are you supposed to be compensated for the work that you do? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that would be probably where our listeners would be more keen, or rather, unfortunate that again, 1 hour was not sufficient for us to get to that point, because addressing the question of how do you value your work has a dichotomy of two components. One would be knowing exactly what is required of you, and then again, how do you compensate that, because you cannot ask for a compensation from a vacuum for something that you even clearly do not understand. So that now, for example, if I'm supposed to give work, let's say, to person X, it would be interesting to know that person X is aware exactly what is supposed to be done, and part of knowing exactly what is supposed to be done is you substantiating and defending even your costing. And for you to say, when I get to preliminary stage, you are supposed to give me 60%, and then now when we come to the preliminary stage, I tell you, okay, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to get, these are the outputs. At least you find that from the client's point of view, you're quite some level of satisfaction that, yeah, I know this somebody who knows what he's supposed to do, is good for the job, can do the job. I think in our next session we'll be able to really go deep into it, and see what the board is trying to direct us on how we're supposed to work on that. I think it was pretty an interesting conversation to have. Challenging again from the perspective that we have also been pointing out, because there are certain things that are not seen from how you were able to see it.
Yeah. And also, we'd like to invite, like we say, this is just our own subjective opinions or interpretations of this work. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, these people got that thing so wrong, you can send us an email to let us learn and learn more, or even just leave a comment. At least if you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment on YouTube. Our email is themhandisipodcast@gmail.com, or however you want to send. We would love to hear, because let's just put it, this is a discussion that we want to have. We're also learning, and we just want to have, let's just say, we are stirring up the pot so that conversation can be brought around this very, very important topic.
Yeah, very true. By the way, and for the questions that you have, again, you if you are clients, if you are consumer of engineering services, again, you can point us out to the gray areas that probably, in your experience partaking in the services, you think that the engineering fraternity is supposed to improve on, or if there's something that we missed. Yes, you can reach out to us again. As one producer said, we are open. Feedback is good, just to help us to even improve this services, and even as a country as we move forward. I think it's necessary again that you share your feedback, feel empowered, um, and we'll respond to you adequately.
Okay. All right. So hopefully we'll see you in the part 2 of Engineers Rules. Look forward to that.
Kabisa.